In this video, I'm going to take you through 5 techniques that I use as part of my music making process that have allowed me to move from having hundreds of unfinished tracks and feeling frustrated and unable to progress as a musician to completing 16 albums of music. These are things that still work for me now, so if you're struggling with similar issues, they may be of use to you. So today I'd like to talk a bit about my music making process. Not so much about the sounds or the instruments I use, but how I create work, how I finish work, and the process that I go through to remain productive. I know there's a lot of videos out there that talk about finishing your music, and there's probably a lot of good advice in those videos. I'm not trying to present solutions for everyone, tips for being productive. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm just going through my particular process, what I've worked out, ways I've overcome problems that I've had. I'm not a productivity guy, although over the years I have read a lot of productivity and self-help books, quite a few. It's just my own working process. It may not be relevant to a lot of people because we make music in different ways. We've got different aims for what we want out of our music, and we're just different people with different ways of working, different minds. So take all that on board. This is my process, but it might help some people. These changes that I'm outlining here, they've helped me a lot to remain productive and to finish tracks and to move from quite a bad place to quite a good place, and it's still the way that I work today. So let's have a look. So it's 2016 and I've managed to restart my music practice after about a 15-year gap. I've managed to carve out an hour or two most days, or a few days a week after work in the evening, to start working on music again. I was learning Ableton Live and I was doing all the work on my laptop. 15 years earlier, I'd attempted for a while to start a career as an electronic musician after college. But it was quite different in those days. You were trying to attract labels, and I'd been sending out some demos, and I'd managed to get a 12-inch EP out. But ultimately, I couldn't make a living from it at the time. And so I moved into design and software development. And so for 15 years, music had taken a back seat. 2016, I'd started working on things again in my spare time. So now we're moving to 2018, and a couple of years later, learning Ableton Live, getting slowly better at producing, having a lot of fun, but I was starting to come up against some problems, quite classic problems really, of people starting out. I wasn't really finishing any tracks. I was starting a lot of tracks and a lot of ideas. I was unhappy with the production of the work. Even though I was improving in Ableton Live, I still wasn't able to make things that I felt were good enough to share. So I'd start a track, it'd be good fun, I'd be working on it. Normally I'd be stuck in a loop of some kind, 4 bars, 8 bars, and then I'd be trying to produce the sounds, make it better, and I'd work too hard in that loop before building out any songs. Eventually I'd overwork it. At the time, I was trying to produce music that was similar to the work that I'd done previously. So it was electronic music, drums, bass, samples, probably call it IDM, intelligent dance music. So I ended up with a folder full of hundreds of ideas and hundreds of starting points. And I wasn't finishing anything. I thought, I can't go on like this. So I started to think about the whole process, ways that I could move forward, finish work. And that's when I started to implement these ideas and these changes that I still use now. I've written them as 5 ideas or techniques, but really they're all interconnected. So even though I present them as a list, they refer around to each other. So they all work together. So first off, I needed a way to finish work and get it out into the world in some kind of form. So I decided to start sharing music on a regular basis as a way to force myself to finish things, and also to overcome this problem of perfectionism, where I wanted everything to be of such a high level, a level that I wasn't going to attain at that time. I wasn't capable of producing music as good as the music that I was listening to. So I think it's a trap that a lot of people fall into, is that comparison. And I thought I would attempt to finish a track, however simple it was. I would do some kind of arrangement and share it. So I chose SoundCloud to do that. And so from mid 2018, I started sharing 1 track a week on SoundCloud to overcome that resistance to public embarrassment, which I think, stops a lot of people. And it went well. I started to get some feedback. It was enabling me to push forward and to finish things, even though the arrangements I did to start with were very simple, just turning things on and off. But it was just to get something out of the door every week. And it is hard to put yourself out there, but it's well worth it. I think if you're really bothered, you can always do it anonymously, because it's not that you really need the feedback. It's for me, it was the iteration of going round that loop of making something good enough to share, and then learning from that process. And then you do start to get feedback from people. People like what you do, and it's great. It's really helpful. And I think that idea of quantity over quality for a beginner is quite important. It was for me, in that I just really needed to get things out of the door and out of the huge Ableton folder that wasn't doing me any favors. A lot of the early stuff I've taken down since, and I don't really use SoundCloud in that way anymore. I tend to put finished work on SoundCloud now, but if I am in the studio working on new stuff, work in progress, then I tend to put that work on Substack, which is like a studio journal for me. So I'll put unfinished tracks, things I'm working on, up on Substack. And obviously you can share music wherever works for you. If that's sites like this, social media, or YouTube, live streaming on YouTube. You could even go busking. So whatever works for you, I would definitely recommend, and I still do, like to share music or work in progress as I'm going along. So this little guy, he's got his large folder of Ableton unfinished tracks, and now he's moving on because he's sharing his music regularly on SoundCloud. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is that I've called Removing resistance. So what do I mean by this? So for me, that means removing resistance in two ways. So there's resistance to finishing tracks and there's resistance to starting tracks. So the resistance to finishing tracks is that problem of the large folder of ideas that you've overworked. One of the first things I did was go through that big folder and archive a lot of stuff. So I think at one point I must have had 100 ideas, 100 unfinished tracks in this folder. So reduce it down to 20 or 10, and then archive the rest. I never delete anything. I think it's wise to never delete anything if you can. I've learned that through through deleting things that I wanted back. But to thin out that folder and to reduce it down to the kind of top level ideas, you're going to be more willing to finish those. It's going to be easier to work through those tracks. So that's what I did. I do that now still when I work on projects. I often collect a lot of work over a period of time, and then I'll reduce it down, thin it out to just the ideas that are really, really good. The problems that I was having in Ableton were often a result of too many options. For instance, kick drums. I'd have so many drum kits that were built into the software and the extra packs that I downloaded. I'd literally have hundreds, and you can spend so long just going through kick drums, and it's just crazy. The same with lots of sounds. So bass sounds, I would spend hours trying to find the best bass sound for a track. And it was, they're very destructive processes, too many options, option paralysis. I tried to work on that and remove that problem by reducing down the amount of options that I had available. So kick drums, get rid of most of the kits, and just have a small collection of kits that you really like the sounds on all the time. Which is one way, in fact, which hardware works quite well when you've got limited options. So I was trying to limit my options here in order to not get stuck in overproduction. I organised the things that I really like so that they were readily available, plugins and things that I used a lot. And I still do that now. If I fire up Ableton, I've got small folders of stuff that I use a lot, and I don't really add much to it anymore. But I did add at the time to help me starting tracks. I was struggling with finding more realistic or acoustic instruments. I realised that I was spending a lot of time trying to tweak those as well. And so I ended up adding Spitfire Audio Labs, the Labs plugin that has a lot of acoustic instruments, and I liked a lot of the sounds in there, and I could use them almost straight away. That enabled me to start quicker on tracks. So this guy is happy, he's moving on, he's removed a lot of resistance. He's neither happy nor sad, but he's better than he was. The next heading I've got is projects. So something that works for me well is to have an overall project for a time. So this was probably my first project, the Ableton folder. And then after that, I moved on to doing different types of projects. It works better for me than just having a kind of making music into just going on as a line into the future. I like to have this kind of structure to it. So the first part is really time experimenting and creating, and it's in a lot of ways it's obviously the fun part is that making work, collecting it, and sharing what I'm doing, work in progress on Substack and Instagram, and then there comes a time where I think, okay, I've got enough now, enough stuff. And because the way I work now tends to be live recordings. So I'll have enough stuff that I've done, and it's time to stop making new work for a while and try and go through this process of finishing things. So that's what I'll do. I'll stop working for a while and I'll move into a process of thinning out the work that I've got, bringing it down to the core tracks that work really well, and then I'll have some tracks to move forward with and to finish off into normally into an album. I know some people don't like albums anymore, but for me, the idea of a project which is a certain type of music using certain setups, or trying to achieve a certain thing, and then bringing that work together into a final album, that works well for me. It allows me to do an ambient album followed by a techno album followed by a modular album, and then maybe a generative or experimental. I can jump around in all of these different things, and but still work within this kind of process. So this guy, he's working in projects. There he is. The next idea, the next heading, something that I learned quite early on when I was trying to finish this early work, was the idea of not fatiguing your hearing. Initially, this was quite key to me, learning this idea that that's what I was doing. I mean, if you're going through hundreds of kick drums, there's no way you can't fatigue your ears, and you just can't hear anything anymore. It's you lose your perspective on what you're listening to, and it's a dangerous place to be in when you're trying to finish tracks, when you've listened to something too long, particularly in loops. And so to avoid this, now I don't work on when I'm in this finishing phase of tracks, I don't work on things for too long. I'll only work on each one probably for about an hour at the most. You can work on something for a long period of time, and then the next day when you go back to open it up, things just stand out straight away that don't work, and you might have spent hours working on some string line, or some pattern in it, and then the next day you think, oh no, that doesn't work, and you just take it out straight away. That's the fresh ears thing. So if you can be, as much as possible, I try to keep myself in this state of not fatiguing my hearing. And so while I'm finishing things, I rotate the tracks quite regularly. As soon as I think that I'm getting into any too much detail on something, I tend to just move on to the next track and stop working on it, come back to it the next day, work on it again. So this works really well for me, and it has stopped a lot of the problems that I had early on. So keep your ears fresh. So he's pretty happy now, this guy. This last heading here, open to change. So I've learned that for me, it works well to be open to not hanging on to anything, not any idea. When I started this process 6 years ago, I was trying to do work similar to the stuff that I'd done a long time ago. And I very quickly realized that wasn't me anymore, and it probably wasn't anyone anymore. But that I needed to move forward and just go where things take you. And since then, I've tried to embrace that, and that's why I think there's quite a lot to overcome there. I think you can be very attached to things. I was definitely attached to the idea that I would be able to produce electronic music in the style that I've been doing before. And now I try to not be scared of taking on new things, because I think, like, I've recently started working with a modular, but I'm really pleased with the work that I've done. And I think that even though you might be quite intimidated initially to try a different style or a different type of music, I think you're never really starting from scratch if you've done lots of other things. You're just reapplying your knowledge in different ways, and so it's always you doing the thing and starting something new. So it's always going to be different from other people. So you don't need to compare yourself and think, oh, I haven't been doing this for very long. It's going to take me years. But I think you just be open to change and just take on whatever you want to try. And that I'm very much into that idea. And even though I have types of music that I like to produce, I could go anyway in the future. I'm happy to do that. I've made lots of moves in these 6 years. I've moved from Ableton to using hardware or hybrid systems, all different types of hardware. I made another video about that journey of trying out lots of different hardware. I'll link it in at the end. I've tried lots of different styles. I started doing electronic music, and now I've done a lot of ambient work, and I like to do experimental stuff as well. And not only the equipment that I use and the types of music that I make, but the way that I go about sharing the work and the platforms that I use. I've always tried to be open with that as well. Like, this is new for me. Doing this type of work on YouTube is new. And so I'm going through some of these things again. I'm trying to work out what it is about making YouTube videos about music that is hard, and there's a lot of hard things. So I'm looking at how I can optimize that to remove resistance from it. And, I think it's important to be open in that way, just so you can take on what comes along and take up the opportunities that come along. Okay, so this guy now, he's open to change. He's open to change, and he's changed into a cat because he's open to change. So you can find all my music on Bandcamp, my music and my field recordings on Bandcamp, and you can find my writings, sharing work in progress on my Substack site. So I'll put the links to those down in the description. So if you found this useful, or you found it annoying, or you're angry, or you're happy, or you've got your own tips, any of those things, just put them down in the comments. I hope this has been of use, and I'll see you in the next one.